Members of council, members of senior management staff, I see that we have quorum, so I call to order this October 17th meeting of Policy and Priorities. Adoption, call to order, and any declaration, oh no, we got a call to order, adoption of agenda, so I'm sorry. After reading the agenda, is there any change to the agenda? Yes, Mr. Pat, Councilor Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that under new business, items 5.5 and 5.6 be deferred to a special meeting that is being proposed,
Okay.
as we'll need more time and more, I guess, opportunity to discuss it. And
Okay, so that's 5.5 capital budget evaluation criteria, and 5.6 permissive grants.
be deferred.
Be deferred to the special meeting a week from
Or-
today.
Yeah.
So on that motion, on that amendment, any discussion? All those for that motion? Okay, and now for the
Congratulations.
adoption of the agenda.
As amended.
With that motion, all those in favor? Okay, thank you. So, so disclosure of pecuniary interest, anyone have anything to declare?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And new business is, wait,
Barb, you got 5 minutes.
okay.
Trustee Ball read it?
No, that's the agenda.
So, there we go.
Would you sign that?
Yes.
This is your first.
Okay. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Rybiak, that Policy and Priorities Committee receive this Department of Community Planning and Development report for information as it pertains to Planning Act changes. Discussion, Council. Councillor Rybiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Rybiak
Rybiak,
asks
yeah.
staff what potential impact there is on our current zoning review of these changes. Does this reflect the need for any particular change in our direction with regard to that?
Excellent question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you, it wouldn't result in any change to what we're doing with the zoning bylaw itself. It wouldn't have any kind of impact on that. What it will have some impact on is we have to be very clear in terms of notices when council is adopting this and when we're preparing reports to you. The information that we've received in public input and what has been done to consider the information with regards to public input on an application, but it won't change the direction with respect to the zoning bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Councillor Cruzy.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. Interesting to see that this new legislation addresses some concerns with the OMB and restores some decision-making back to the local municipality, at least provides some mechanics to try and short-circuit the OMB process and scope it and all of that sort of thing, which should be beneficial to the community from a defense standpoint, I think. There are a number of initiatives that have been instigated here. One is to have a planning advisory committee at the upper tier, but the lower tier may have a planning advisory committee. Is it staff's consideration to bring forward a report recommending such an advisory committee, and do you see a role for an advisory committee within the realm of this municipality?
Madam Director.
Mr. Chair, through you, certainly haven't given that one much thought at this point in time. I think if we were to do something like that, it would be something that we would think about perhaps, you know, at the next sitting of council, and whether there's a desire to put a planning advisory committee in place. It is certainly optional for lower tier municipalities, but for upper tier and single tier municipalities, it's required. So we do have that option and that flexibility. That opportunity and option for planning advisory committees has always been there. So, you know, it's always been optional. So that in of itself is not new. It's just what is new is that it's required for the upper tier
I see.
municipalities.
Councilor
If I,
Frazee?
can continue. Another thing that it speaks to in terms of openness and transparency is an explanation of the effect of public input on the ultimate legislation or bylaw or change that's brought about through the planning process. Do you envision in developing such a responsive type of format?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, we've already started to include in our staff reports to you when we're bringing forward a recommendation. There's usually a paragraph in terms of the public input that we've heard and whether or not there's been a change made to the bylaw to address public input, or a change to the draft plan or the change to an official plan amendment. And then in our notices, when we publish the notice of decision, we include in that notice as well now, moving forward, a description of the input that the public input has had on that decision.
I wonder if we might incorporate something like a flow chart that we could post on the website where this public input, and this resulted in this, or was not used for this reason type of thing. Because I sometimes think that the lack of engagement in some of these processes is people think that they're wasting their breath. But if we could demonstrate clearly that, you know, you brought this up to address this issue, it was a valid point, but was not used in its fullness because of, or it was used to demonstrate that we are here, we're listening, and in fact, we do consider the input from the public, and this is how it's used and massaged into the process.
Certainly that's something that we can consider in terms of how do we track the public input and then how do we report that, you know, comprehensively, not just on each individual application, but in, you know, comprehensively across the board as development proposals come forward, yes.
Thank you. And I have one last question, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
It talks about a community planning permit to replace the old development permit, which we don't really have. And I wondered what staff's thought was in terms of having a community planning permit in place. Is it something we should be considering, the pros and cons? Or maybe you would like to bring a report to sort of discuss that in a broader scope rather than a 30-second answer.
So the community planning permit system was the former development permit system, and while the development permitting system has been around for a number of years, it's really only been taken up in very few instances. The city of Hamilton tried it as a pilot, and they abandoned it. Elsewhere, they tried it as well as a pilot. I think the township of Lake of Bays did put it in place, but it took a number of years for it to come into place, and they use it around their lakeshore waterfront development in Lake of Bays. So I think also what's happened with this is they've come out with some new regulations, which I think will help streamline the what is now the community planning permitting system. What is really important in developing that, it'll be your official plan policies that really provide the criteria under which a community planning permit can be reviewed, evaluated, and assessed. And typically what happens is those community planning permits are approved at a staff level and are taken out of council's hands. It's not a decision that's made by council, and so that's something that, you know, many councils wrestle with because it does minimize the opportunities for public input if it meets all the criteria that are laid out in your official plan, and it minimizes the amount of council decision making. So there are pros and cons to the community planning permitting system, and I think it can be used in certain applications. But whether it's used across the board, that is something that I think would, you know, probably cause council some concern and probably wouldn't want to go that way. But in certain areas of a community or a certain type of development, you could certainly look at that type of permitting system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the clarity. Appreciate it.
Councilman Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to build on a previous comment from Councillor Kersey, at AMO in Windsor, we sat in on a workshop where that very process took place. As a matter of fact, they were a little more aggressive. They went out and asked for opinions and things like that, and there was quite an extensive study that was done, and it really, I'm not sure the whole municipality where it was, but I'm sure we can research that out. It served to show the transparency of the process, and in fact, all the people that are naysayers to say, geez, I said it, nobody listened to me, that's the comment, here's how we did it, and this is why we did it or why we didn't do it, and that went a long way to confidence from the community, and I think that's a great thing to build on. It may mean an extra little bit of workload, maybe extra lot of workload, depending upon the issue that comes forward, but I certainly see that could be very beneficial, and I'm going to make a comment about something else later on that actually builds on that as well. So I think that's something that we can really have a look at, and I think between Councillor Kersey and I, we can research the source of that and perhaps get a little more information on that, because it's certainly by their illustration and by their presentation at this workshop, it worked so very well that everybody was very impressed and everybody was very happy with it. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Dave?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The status of this, can we just hear about the status of this bill? So it is in force and effect?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you, the Bill 73 received royal assent last December, and many of these changes came into effect July 1st.
Okay. Thank you. Just a comment about the Planning Advisory Committee. I wonder if that's a response. I mean, you know, when I think about this council, it's a part-time council. Councilors are representative of the public, and I wonder if some of this feedback or the reason why regional councils or other cities, they're saying that they want to have that public feedback is because they're sort of full-time councilors or things like that, as opposed to this council, which is a part-time council. So that's sort of my thinking about the rationale for some of that. The alternative dispute resolution process that was talked about for the OMB, or that is in the report for the Ontario Municipal Board, do we have to sort of set something up in place ahead of time, or staff working on that, Mr. Chair? We haven't had an OMB appeal since this came into effect, but just knock on wood, I hope we don't, but just wondering if we have something in place for that, or staff are going to recommend that.
Mr. Chair, through you, my understanding is that this is this the 90-day pause? Is that where you're talking about, where you're allowed to look at opportunities for alternative dispute?
Right.
So that applies where we're dealing with an official plan or an official plan amendment. So either an official plan update or a new official plan or official plan amendment. So it applies in those circumstances only. So to date, we have not obviously yet had an opportunity to employ this. There wouldn't be anything that you would need to do to set this up. It is something that's allowed under the Planning Act, and it would require both parties, however, to agree to it. So if we know that there's a burning issue and it's going to result in an appeal, the council could say, could you please explore if there is opportunity to, let's take a pause in this, timeline and see if we can come to some resolution and then move forward with the rest of the matter.
Okay, thank you. The second unit policies are interesting, that they can just be had with a change in the official plan, which is something that we talked about in the zoning, when that update occurs. And then also the built environment piece. Can we just hear 30 seconds on that built environment piece, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the built environment is now considered to be a matter of provincial interest. So we have seen under provincial interest, there's a number of matters that are of provincial interest. This is relating to certainly some segments in the provincial policy plan that talks about building complete communities and with a built environment that's appropriate for the character of the area. So they've come out and made it a provincial matter of provincial interest, so it's giving it some more strength and weight. And it also means that when we do our official plan, if we're going to update our official plan, we want to look specifically at those built environment policies and see what we need to do to strengthen those. We currently do have some good policies that speak to built environment now already, but there's opportunity to potentially strengthen those.
Good, thank you.
Councilor Gerthy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just a point of privilege, perhaps. I take exception to the comment about the difference between a full-time or a part-time counselor, because I'm a counselor here, and I think everybody at this table is, when an issue comes forward to us, we take it very seriously, and we take it to the people that can do something about it. So I don't think there is any difference between a full-time or a part-time counselor. We're elected to represent our people, and this is what we do. So I just, maybe I took it wrong, but I took exception just to the way that came out, or the way I understood it. Thank you.
Apologies, Mr. Chair, if I may respond, apologies to the councillor. I was suggesting that actually members of this council, as part-time councillors, are closer to the public and represent the public much better than a full-time professional politician. So that's, I apologize to the councillor. I was trying to say that councillors represent the public extremely well on this council.
Thank you, Mayor Dave. Anyone else on this motion? Okay. So that Policy and Priorities Committee received this Department of Community Planning and Development report for information as it pertains to Planning Act changes. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. Motion by Councillor Durley that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the report Benefit Policy Revision, and that committee recommend that council extend the benefit coverage as outlined in the report to include permanent, part-time, and fixed-term, full-time employees. Discussion. Oh, Councillor Ribiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few questions. And this is with regard, and through you to our director, this is with regard to the table of benefits and status of employees, and you know the one I'm referring to. So just a few basic questions with regard to the coverages that are being presented or being offered to part-time and fixed-term employees. Are the benefits scaled to the size of the earnings? Is there a relationship, or is it the same benefit that extends to anybody who's on the program?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it is the same benefits, regardless of the hours worked, which is why, though, we have a qualifying period. Unlike full-time employees who get it as a day one of their employment, these folks will have to qualify in order to get coverage.
Fair enough. Now, if I may, Mr. Chair, through you, you indicate the monthly premium is the same monthly premium as existing single coverage, i.e. $162.55 per employee. Is that a premium that employees pay or that we pay as an employer?
No, the town pays for it 100%.
And the town would be paying the same premium for, proposed that it would be paying the same premium per person to part-time and permanent part-time and fixed-term full-time as our current employees.
Correct, because the extended health and the dental coverage would be the same, And the only thing that we're not extending to them is the travel plan. So we do pay a little bit more when we include travel as far as the green shield coverage, but our extended health and dental are the same coverage.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, so the $162.55 is not the premium we pay for the full benefit package for a full-time employee. It's actually the premium that relates specifically to the benefits that are there.
That's correct.
So we're getting those specific benefits at the same rate that we do others.
Yes.
So something a bit more substantive, Mr. Chair, through you. You've indicated that not included, and now I'm going to refer specifically to permanent part-time, not included are travel, short-term disability, long-term disability. I have nothing to quibble about with regard to travel. But a permanent part-time employee, by virtue of them being permanent, and some of them, I think, have been with us for a long time, and are therefore truly dependent on their earnings from the town, why would we not include them in short-term disability and long-term disability? Both of those benefits would be scaled to their earnings, right? And it would be based on hours expected to have been worked through the year. Why would we not think of including permanent part-time employees who are our employees in every sense of the word, except the number of hours that they work? Why would we not include them in short-term disability and long-term disability?
To be honest with you, I really just, through you, Mr. Chair, I really just drew from my past experience in that, again, in wanting to have a differentiation between our full-time and our other statuses. We want to offer some benefits that will help to add to their compensation, but some benefits are a perk of being a full-time employee. So it has always been in my past experience that short-term and long-term disabilities were reserved for the full-time status employee. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to looking into that for our part-time employees.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to move an amendment, if I may, to this thing when I finish my questions with regard to that specifically. I'd like to talk about the fixed-term full-time employees. Are fixed-term full-time employees not contracted to be with us?
They are contracted, but they're not contractors, so they are still employees. They're temporary employees that are only with us, so they're not permanent. They are temporary full-time employees that are here for a duration of a contract.
And their contract would cover a start date, a finish date, scope of work,
Yes.
also their salary and benefits,
Yep.
presumably. So I take it that what we're proposing to offer them would become terms in the contract as opposed to a right by policy, if I can differentiate between the two.
Yes.
So their contract, and if they come to the end of their contract term and there's a sense that we're going to extend it because we need to, then a new contract would be drawn up or an amendment to the contract
And
would be
that's
drawn
exactly
up.
what we do right now. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so in that case, the extension of benefits would be on the basis of the contract,
Yes.
and they are clearly contract employees, and the benefits that they receive are by virtue of the box that the contract is as opposed to anything else.
Correct.
So, Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is to propose that for our permanent part-time employees, that their benefit plan include short-term disability and long-term disability as well. I'd see a significant difference between fixed-term employees who have no expectation of a long-term relationship with the corporation because they're on a contract and there's a specific piece of work that needs to be done, and when they're done the work, they're done with their employment. But a permanent part-time employee is, in every sense that's at all meaningful, I think, a part of the team, a part of the fabric of the employment structure of the town. The fact that the work that they do is not required over the full term of the year doesn't make them any less an employee than a permanent full-time employee. And the fact of the matter is that they become ill or injured just as readily as anyone else. We're not talking about a benefit that is larger or better, because these are benefits that are scaled to their earnings in any case. So I see that I would be happier certainly if those two benefits were included for permanent part-time, and I would propose that amendment for discussion among colleagues.
Council, before I accept your amendment, would it be suitable to you if we had a continued discussion?
Absolutely. I leave it to you. I just, I'm going to propose that amendment in whatever time is, that you feel is right for further discussion. I'd participate in it, but just so you know.
Thank you. Councilor Durden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, if an employee in either one of those categories was injured on the job, disabled on a job, rendered disabled permanently, would workman's compensation take over? And so it wouldn't be an insurance benefit per se from us, it would be, so in fact, if a full-time employee was to do that, would it be the same type of procedure? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone else? Councilor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some concerns about this. I feel one of the advantages, the financial advantages to the corporation, and I think we're here to be responsible for the corporation and the funds that we administer, is that, and one of the reasons that we have adopted a permanent part-time or fixed-term full-time employee is to make it cheaper for the operation of the corporation. And that if that employee proves his worth and the job opportunity opens up, then that individual can transition into a more full-time permanent position. One of the motivations for them to do that is that they will gain benefits. If we give them the benefits now, what's the quantum on it? We don't know how much we're even voting for. We're talking about $162 per employee for as presented. How many of them are there? What's the impact on the levy? We're faced with spending, to quote Kevin O'Leary, it boils down to the money, right? We have to be responsible for the money that we administer. Yes, we have to be kind to our employees. We pay them very well. We treat them well. The library board came under fire a number of years ago when they had part-time employees that were receiving benefits. And they were wholly and roundly criticized around this table for that, and changes were made to change that. And here we are now going back and going to offer this to ours. I will not support it. To me, it goes against what I see as a standard operating procedure in the private sector. I know we're not the private sector, but we treat our employees very well relative to the private sector in terms of payment, job stability, all of those other things that provide great benefit to come and work for a municipal corporation. The other thing I'm concerned about is this just another conduit to leading to converting these people into permanent full-time employees? By what's the next step? So I won't support it unless I hear some very significant arguments in favor of it. So far, I've heard nothing. So you know where I stand.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Dave?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see that the director wants to respond to Councilor Kersey first. I don't know if perhaps.
I may, through you, Mr. Chair. I understand your concern that this is a step to make people full-time, but in actual reality, this is a step into having alternate statuses become just as sought after as our full-time employment. So one thing that I have talked about a lot in council is that I will be very diligent that we don't just add full-time heads to our staff complement. But having said that, we also we will be hiring more fixed-term contracts.
Maybe.
As well as we know right now, we have an accountant who's on contract for 18 to 24 months. We have a couple of people who will be taking year-long maternity leaves that could be extended to 18 months if the Liberal government, if their wishes go through. So we're looking at those people could potentially be on board for 20 months. So we need people to see these jobs, whether permanent, part-time, or fixed term, not as stopgaps. If they just take these jobs but continue to look for a permanent employment that's gonna offer them benefits, then the amount of money that we're gonna be losing in downtime because we don't have staff, recruitment, training, onboarding, all of those things, will add up substantially. So to offer a base level benefit, so it's a single coverage only, base level health and dental, when the average trip to a dentist just for a checkup is $300, this could go so far into showing them that we are taking care of their base needs, which is a reasonable base salary plus a reasonable benefits that certainly doesn't meet what our full-time staff get, but it's something to sustain them within the town, and hopefully that they will stay the duration of their contract or remain as long-term part-time employees.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate the clarity, Mr. Chair, that the director provided. And I do commend her for thinking about, you know, where the town, future needs of the town might be. So a couple of years ago, council will recall, where we had some part-time employees, and staff recommended to council, and we agreed that those part-time employees, quite a large number, would be sort of turned into a couple of full-time equivalents. So there could be a possibility if, and we've had a lot of discussions lately about the need for new services and things like that, perhaps those could be achieved, if they need to be achieved, and this council determines they need to be achieved, they could be achieved through a part-time person as opposed to a full-time. So I commend the director for thinking about that. I think it would be important, Mr. Chair, for the director to answer the question of Councillor Kersey in terms of the number of staff we're talking about. So maybe on the permanent part-time and the fixed-term full-time. Can we hear the number of individuals we're talking
Madam
about?
Director?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. So right now, our permanent part-time staff is 4. We have 1 that would qualify, that would meet the 600 hours over 6 months. We have a second who, in a month or 2, depending on the hours that this person puts in, could qualify. But I just have to do the research on to the number of hours this person's put in. For our fixed-term contracts, we do have 3 on board, but we only have 1 currently that would qualify for the 6 months. And at the end of December, we would have our second one qualify. So as far as dollars right now, if we were to roll this out now, we're looking at $325.10 a month.
That's $4,000 a year.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, my final question at this point, and then I do want to maybe make a comment, is to the director, and I did discuss this with her this afternoon, but this is something new since that discussion, so there's her 30 seconds. I guess the thinking on the fixed-term full-time, so somebody is here, they're hired, and they're doing exceptional work, and they're hired for a full year maternity leave, let's say, or paternity leave, and they don't have benefits. According to this plan, after 6 months, they would have benefits. So the natural thing, maybe some of us have been in that situation, and please don't take offense from that, anybody, but the natural thing might be that you say, okay, I'm going to save up my eyeglasses and my dental work and whatever until I hit that 6 months, and then going to get all that done, and then 6 months later they're working elsewhere because we don't have a role for them. It would seem to me that might, Mr. Chair, drive up rates. So how do we kind of balance that with the approach that's being suggested here in terms of wanting to provide that additional benefit for those full-time fixed-term employees?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think absolutely. I think there will always be that percentage of the population that sees this as a money grab, an opportunity to get everything done that they need to have done. If you talk to the fixed-term contract employees that we have on now, who are eager to have a long-term career with the town. My suspicion would be no. My suspicion would be they are as dedicated as any full-time employee. And do we see our full-time employees abusing the process? So I would say that the similar benefit of the doubt needs to go to these folks that we're bringing on as for a fixed term, that we've hired good people with good intentions. They'll use the benefit as needed and wouldn't abuse the system. Will everybody? Maybe. We might get the odd one that does, but you know what? You know, that's, I think that's a risk we need to take, because why would we penalize the majority for the 2%? That'll find a way to beat our system.
Okay, thank you. I was going to recommend, Mr. Chair, that, Councilor Ribbiak had a good suggestion, I think, and maybe this needs to be looked at a little bit more. So my suggestion would have been to send it back to staff to answer some of the concerns that have been raised by council, but, so I'm not sure if that's something that council would want to do. We might need more information, like the number of employees, the impact on the budget per year, et cetera. That's not necessarily in the body of the report.
All right, before we entertain that thought, does any other councillor wish to speak on this item? Councillor Pat.
I take the opposite position, since I work with this day in, day out. The difference, though, being that the compensation levels of the employees I work with are very low. So offering benefit packages to them to keep them there, keep them safe, and keep them committed to that, it's one thing. I do agree, Councilor Kersey, our employees are well paid. There's no question. I look at it as the opposite, that it complements their ability by offering, we know this from study upon study, that employees stay for good working conditions, good benefits. It's not always the pay. And I think this is part of an initiative that we need to ensure that balance-wise we don't get out of control, and we are not setting ourselves up for a fact that, and I've never seen that happen, or I shouldn't say that, I take that back. In the past, sometimes what has happened, it's true, these positions have become permanent positions in the organization. But where I was a little confused, and forgive me, Madam Director, through you, Mr. Chair, I've been working on the same sort of thing of what is a permanent part-time, and the legal interpretation, and maybe I was given the wrong, that anyone that works above 25 hours a week on a long-term basis is basically a full-time employee. Now, I stand corrected. That's why when I was reading there 35, 44 hours a week, I sat there and said, these are full-time people. And in the case where it is true that by the contracts, they renew the contracts, we renew contracts year by year, terms and conditions change. Our idea is to reduce, how can I say, people leaving and getting sick. So I would support, along with Councilor Ribbiak, the idea of offering this is, to me, it's a better risk, particularly with the employees. Now, hopefully, we're not hiring people that are taking advantage. I would personally, I set that aside. That's small potatoes, small stuff. The bigger thing is if this also sets up something we've talked about for years, as these fixed contracts, as we talk about succession planning, as employees leave, do we have the players that are there that could step in and make things a lot more, how can I say, compatible, so that you can promote people? Many times, the other reason people leave, there's no promotability. They just look around and say, I'm stuck here, so what am I going to do? So, but the details on the impact on budgets and that, it'd be worth a while for us to if you could come back with a little bit more, how can I say, substance to it, so we feel comfortable that we're not exposing ourselves to a situation where we'd be criticized saying, well, you're just increasing the bureaucracy. What's the difference? And forgive I'm not trying to be critical. It's just that I've been used to hearing this, but at the same time, I know right now, these days, the extension of benefits in many, many cases is crucial for keeping employees, how can I say, committed to the organization, and that they will allow themselves to become much more committed and part of the fabric. So I'll leave it at that. If you don't mind, also, when I saw that numbers of per hours per week, I thought to myself, they're not permanent part-time people. Really, they're in fact contracted full-time employees. Maybe I'm wrong.
If I may respond to that through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, absolutely. So employment standards does not dictate what is full-time and what is part-time.
Right.
Our federal government has established 30
It has
hours,
established
and
that,
anything
that's
over
correct.
30 hours is full-time, but employment standards doesn't have that. I'll be honest with you, where we run the risk is we call them permanent part-time, yet they are getting 35 to 44 hours routinely. And they don't, their overtime eligibility is different than our permanent full-time. So there's some inequities that, quite honestly, we need to be careful about. And I think being able to show that we are giving benefits will help with that inequity.
We need to elaborate, you're right, I'm only gonna say, in my other hat, in fact, I have two cases exactly, that's what's happened. These people have been working, they've been called part-time, they've been working easily 35, 40 hours a week for, in some cases, for years. You know, which I just found stunning, that, you know, and with no benefits, and I use it only from the point of view that in the population, all of the people, the employees, are females, most of whom are supporting their families. So benefits becomes a crucial factor. And taking them to, in this case, to a more permanent full-time position. I wish I had the luxury, but I could pay them more, but we don't, because we're a nonprofit. But the same token, we also, it's got to be a real strategic type of direction, and I think we need to step off that curb a little bit with a little bit more information. Thank you.
Before Councillor Rabiak, if I could ask the director one question. Any other municipalities, we got a benchmark, or are we leading the pack here, or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do believe that right now we would be leading the pack. I have reached out to the other municipalities in the Niagara region, and most don't have permanent part-time. Most that are dealing with unions, everyone's covered under a union agreement, and either they get benefits or those staff that are non-union are part-time.
Okay,
So they're full-time when they get benefits. So
Thank
this
you.
certainly would be unique.
okay, thank you. Councillor Rabiak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just again, for clarity, to be honest, when I was making my comments, I was really thinking in terms of part-time employees who in fact worked either seasonally or a reduced work week. What comes to mind are crossing guards, for example, who I believe are permanent. I can be corrected on that, and are certainly part-time, and those are the kinds of individuals that I was referring to. Certainly not thinking in terms of people who are working a 35-hour or plus work week, who by any definition are permanent. If in fact we have short-term seasonal employees, and referring to them as permanent is probably a mistake. We should probably be contracting them annually as needed and renewing the contracts and having, again, our relationship defined within the four corners of whatever that contract is, as opposed to necessarily policies. And in fact, fixed-term, full-time employees may be extremely senior in an organization, and the four corners of a contract may in fact expand far beyond our normal wages or our normal benefits, simply because that's what we need to do in order to be able to capture those individuals. So the presence of a contract gives us all kinds of flexibility depending on the circumstances that we're in. But the moment we call them permanent, then of course we've set up a relationship that I think provides us with an obligation within that. So I was thinking more in terms of those again, short-term, short-day, seasonal kinds of employees. So indeed, I think we need to hear a report back to cover those employees as well, because I don't think those were covered in your description of, in the director's description.
And through you, Mr. Chair, when I think specifically about crossing guards who work 1 hour a day, they would not meet the minimum 600 hours in a rolling 6 months.
Well, that's true too.
And then again, also, and not to be exclusionary, but again, we do have to have some sort of eligibility parameters. And to your point, exactly, when we think about staff, if we even remove seasonal from our language, we either call them permanent or temporary, full-time or part-time. Those are temporary, full-time that we hire for 6, maybe 7 months, and in which case they generally would not meet the 600 hours over the 6-month rolling calendar also.
Thank you. Okay, so do we need an amendment to send this back to staff? Or how should we do that?
Not just
We need
direction.
a motion, we need a motion to refer back.
So I need a motion
I'll give
from
that motion.
Councilor Pat to send the report back to staff with more budgetary concerns included in it? Yes, Council?
Yeah, yes,
Oh.
with clarifying information generally, so that I think you've heard from all of us. There's still some areas in which we need to know number of employees, what departments, status, and the impact that it has. That I think that would be very helpful, if I could say so.
And with specific reference to the treasurer be involved in development of the report so that we get a clearer understanding of the financial impact to the corporation.
Well, that's, I thought, we given.
Okay, well, that's, is it?
That's a given.
It is.
Yeah, well,
It's a given, is it?
I'm sorry, Mr. Kersey, could you repeat that? Your,
I said with specific reference to having the treasurer involved in the development of the report where it pertains to the impact on the levy, the total cost involved, et cetera, going
operating.
forward, not just looking at a 6-month period. I want to look at it a year or 2 years
The impact
down
on
the
the
road.
operating budget.
Madam Director?
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, so the motion is we will send this report back to staff and await them to come back with a more detailed report. All those in favor? And motion carries. Thank you. I shouldn't doodle.
Not on the resolution. Only question is-
Sorry. Okay. A motion put forward by Councilor King, that Policy and Priorities Committee receives the report, full strength of the fire department, and that committee recommends that council approve the full strength of the fire department policy. Discussion on this motion. Councilor Ribbiak.
thank you. Just want real clarity, very good clarity on the term staffing and what it's meant in the context of this report.
Chief?
You, Mr. Chair, active firefighters?
Active volunteer firefighters.
All full-time also, I suppose.
Well,
No,
No.
this is just our suppression, or volunteers.
Oh, I see.
Full-time part-time.
Volunteers.
They're
And
full-time
nothing to do with
part.
our day staff, it's just our suppression volunteers.
Councilor?
thank you. Forgive my utter density here. Are we talking about full-time, permanent, paid staff, or are we talking about volunteers when we're talking within the context of this report? And if there's some of each,
No, we're just strictly
Right.
talking about our volunteer firefighters, no full-time, it's just our volunteer firefighters.
thank you. That was important clarification. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Mayor Dave?
Chair, can the chief perhaps change the word in the background, manpower required, to something else?
Hours.
Anyways, I think we can approve it and just ask them to change that.
Like, okay, is it like people power?
I don't know what I don't know what it is, but the resources
Yeah,
required.
okay, sure.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, if I could just make a comment and a question to the chief. In comments, discussions that I've had either at the Strawberry Festival or when I go skating at the Fireman Rink and what have you, I've had various members of Station Number 3 tell me that the dynamics of that group have changed. I personally know 2 full-time farmers that were once firemen. They've retired, and there seems to be some concern that at the number of 21, that perhaps a day emergency would not be adequately manned, and there is some talk that perhaps that station could be taken, or perhaps even should be taken to 25 members. What's your comment on that?
Staffing levels are based on a couple factors, NFPA 1710 that requires us to put so many men on a scene at so many minutes.
Yes.
We meet those numbers, we exceed those numbers on all 3 stations. if we have a day call, it doesn't matter if it's 1, 2, or 3, if we have a day call and first arriving officer or firefighter notices that we're short,
Yes,
we just call for a second truck. So we have the CAD is backed up, so if we need extra, it's automatic. We've had, staffing levels have been in place since Scott McLeod was chief. They haven't changed. And we really don't change them based on, day calls, or if we have a what-if type thing. We just look at the numbers, and we, as I said, based on 1710, we meet or exceed our numbers for response criteria.
okay.
And also I've said to the firefighters, and I'm sure they have some valid concerns
Yes.
with the way they're thinking.
Yes.
But we have a chain of command in the fire department.
Yes.
And if you think there's a deficiency, you go to your officer, the officers I meet with the DCs on a regular basis and the officers.
Yes.
And if we feel there's a deficiency and the DC comes to me, Jim Waldeck comes to me and says, I think we're getting a little shy, we maybe add a few guys.
Yes.
I don't have a problem doing that, just come back to council and ask for more guys.
Okay, and
But in
because,
this case, there's no data or really anything you throw there that would indicate that we should increase our staffing.
so you don't see the, as I've stated, the direction of losing enough day people, people that work shifts or indeed are busy, have their jobs during the day. You feel that Station 3 still has enough, what do you like, day people, or people available for the day that they could adequately respond. And like you say, if not, you would go to Station 2, is that how you would do?
Or one, however,
I
where
see.
it depends what district or what area we're in, but, if we look at the types of people that we are attracting, and we just finished a recruit class, we just brought in 11 new firefighters.
Oh, okay, for the 3,
Yeah, one for Station 3 and 5 for each Station 2 and 3, so that brings us back up, and we also have some reserves in that place. Yeah, it's really, I wish they would just come, go through the chain of command and bring it through the proper channels.
well,
so
like I
we
said, I
can
was
show
just
them.
in, I just want to assure you, that
Yeah,
was just in
for sure.
conversations, so,
But the last couple of people we've even brought in at Station 3 are actually, I just took the newest member on Station 3 is actually a shift worker.
oh, excellent.
A full-time firefighter, and won't say where he is, but
Yes.
we got a number of, we have police officers, we have government workers, we have a lot of shift workers
Okay.
throughout all 3 stations, and like I said, if we, at any time, they're all trained, that at any time, they even think that we're going to be deficient, they ask for a second station,
Right.
without any doubt.
Great, thank you.
Okay?
Yep. Any other discussion? Okay, we're done. So that the motion, the Policy and Priorities Committee receives the report, full strength of the fire department, and that committee recommends that council approve the full strength of the fire department policy. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Motion by Councillor Ribbiak. Be it resolved, the council will receive the concept report, Public Art Master Plan, and the council hereby approve the Public Art Master Plan dated October 20, 2016. Discussion on the art policy. Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if I seem to be commenting on everything. Read through this, and I'm not sure that I saw much discussion about the extent to which the community would be involved in the points at which decisions might be made within the town. For example, if public art is going to be considered for any particular location, what locations, what form of art, that sort of thing. Obviously, there's discussion about reaching into the community, but it doesn't indicate a role for the community. So one of the things that I thought as I read through this thing was that among other things, there seems to be a natural fit here between this plan and a role for the Beautification Advisory Committee. It seems to be a relationship in concept there. And just wondered whether staff might be able to flesh this out a little bit. Is there a role for them? Is it contemplated? How would it work?
I'm looking it up.
Or did I miss something?
40.
Yeah, page 40?
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, to answer that question, page 40, we did talk about a public art committee. And that public art committee, again, would be a volunteer group of citizens. So I would be reluctant to recommend that beautification sort of absorb art. I think the two are very different. And I think that if council wants more public participation, then the public art committee be considered for enactment in 2017.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Yeah, my page 40 isn't coming up. The process is very slow, so I'm having trouble reaching it. But in any event, perhaps it's okay. Mr. CEO has indicated that he sees the two as being different, that is beautification and an art committee. Maybe you can expand on that a little.
I have to apologize, I didn't catch the last few words.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you've indicated that you see a differentiation in role between a beautification advisory committee and an art committee?
Absolutely. I think it's
And
completely.
maybe you can explain that.
Well, I think that when you look at art, the selection of art, you need people that have expertise and background in art. Although everyone thinks they're an artist and everyone thinks they're an expert, I would argue that there is things that professional artists or people that are in the arts community that have insight to, that people on the beautification committee may not. Their role is different in the sense they're looking out for the general beautification of the town. But when we're talking about public art, it's a whole different realm, and there's a whole different set of, I guess, types of art, if you will. Everything from sculpture art to, murals on buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it takes expertise in some expertise and some knowing of what art is, understanding art, some background in the art. The same way you would appoint anyone to a committee, hoping that they brought some expertise with them. And I don't see that. I see them as two separate committees, and that's my recommendation to council. That would be my recommendation if council wanted to pursue the public art committee.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor?
So how would, through you, Mr. Mayor, how would the art committee be recruited, for want of a better word?
I would presume if council, sorry, Mr. Chairman, through you, if council was desirous of pursuing the public art committee, then again, I would recommend that be something we look at for the start of 2017. We would do it the same way we would do any other public committee. We'd put together terms of reference. Council would approve those. We'd advertise and we'd recruit people that had the skill sets that council felt would help achieve the objectives laid out in whatever the committee work was, in this case, art.
Thank you.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Gurley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what's lacking here is a communications piece, and not from what is being put out, but what is being received, because at the last inning of public art, and I use that baseball term loosely, the reaction was that people hadn't heard of this before, and yet it'd been on the radar for a year. And this is where we're getting out, and again, in our strategic plan, we're looking at trying to reach a specific demographic that we seem to be missing. So somehow we have to incorporate a means by which this gets communicated. By communicated, I mean heard. It's being mentioned, it's being put out there, but somehow it's not being heard by a lot of people until they get to a reaction point and they say, I never heard this before, what's going on, why are we doing this? And this has caused a great concern and a great turmoil with some members of our community, specifically a demographic that we actually said that we need to address. So, again, incorporating that part of the strategic plan with something like this, with every policy we make actually, I think is essential. I don't know how we're going to do it, but somehow our message is not being heard.
Thank you, Council. Councilor Crazy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On another matter, I agree with most of the things that Councilor Durley said, but on another, just as some general commentary. I think, generally speaking, as an overarching policy statement, this fairly represents, I think, a good position to be in for the town. But encased in there are some very specific things that we must enact in order to effectively have this come to real life. Number one being a public art committee. Number two, establishing ways and means to maintain this public art. It's not, and we've heard this over and over again, it's not simply the acquisition, that's one cost, but it's the maintenance of it and how we're going to manage that, how we're going to staff managing that, all of those sort of things. We need to, on the capital side, we need to come up with, and on the maintenance side, we have to come up with a methodology to establish reserves that are specifically dedicated towards the development of public art in the public realm. On the private side, it's a different cat, but in the public realm, we need to come up with some funding mechanism that has little or no impact on the levy. So similarly with the maintenance, we have to have it build up enough reserves that we can move boldly forward. But until we have some reserves, we have to be a bit cautious. I fully support having public art. I fully support the concept that was espoused in our cultural master plan. I think this is the next logical step, but I also think we need to wrap our heads around the mechanics of accomplishing what is envisioned here. And that is to be a place that's engaging, vibrant, speaks to all levels, not just the sportsman, but the culturalist, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd be comfortable approving this, but I think we need a follow-up document that's going to tell us how we can do this with minimizing the impact on the levy, establishing reserves so that whatever we invest in is permanent. We don't want to be like Welland, where they spent a lot of money putting up murals done by good artists that fell apart over time. That is where we will get roundly and justly criticized. So we need to expand this. This is the start. We need to see policies coming forward with respect to the rest. So that's my 2 cents. I would support this for what it is, but I want to see the rest.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I completely concur with the analysis of the council in the sense that this is the master plan, so we start up here, and as we move forward, we progressively introduce policies and all the things that you're talking about. It's the same approach that we took on the cultural side and the cultural master plan, any real master plan for that matter that the town has adopted, even the downtown design guidelines, all those sorts of things. Yeah, they started as big picture, and as time progresses, we get more nuanced and more good at it. We get better at it through policy and those sorts of things that you speak of. So I certainly think that I could say that that's the next logical step in the public art world. Realm rather. I'd also like to maybe just take a step back and indicate to council that back when we looked at, we did start with the master plan before we jumped ahead to a specific public art project. The issue was, though, that when the consultants presented to the council with regards to the master plan, it was not approved by council. It was not considered by council as far as this part was. It was simply, let's get ahead, let's form the committee and let's get on with a specific project. And I think that caused confusion both on council and with the community because we didn't have the supporting master plan in place that we could fall back on and say, well, look, we're following through on our master plan, the same thing that we would follow through on our strategic plan, our cultural plan, our downtown plan. I think that we, again, council sets the foundation with the master plan, and then as we move forward, we complement and augment with policy and specifics.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Anyone else before we vote? Okay. Oh,
Just
Councilor
quickly,
Pat.
those communities across the world and in here that have embraced this, and I support a public art plan. I agree, Councilor Kersey, have to have the resources, the ongoing maintenance, and the intent that it fits in with the overall general scheme of what happens. And generally stated, we'll get there, and I know we'll get there, but this is an important reflection of who we are and what we are. And I also, as Councilor Kersey, grew up in Welland, and we can give you several examples where things were started. On the other side of the coin, and John, pardon me, Councilor Durley, remember, and Councilor Kersey, the things that were built in Merritt Park, dedications, different things that were done with the intention. I'll give the example that the Albion Leon's statue that's in Chippewa Park, it's not a secret. There's money set aside from the Leon's family to make sure that that's always kept in that capacity, even though it sits on public property, public land. So I think you'll get there. I think that's part of the policy, and we do not want to see it go back. So that's just my general comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just to build on those comments, I think communities around the world that are vibrant, creative, caring, innovative also have public art.
They do.
And it's part of something that usually is meant to pull the community together, and something that people point to as part of the community. So there are some examples in the document. We've, through the years, councils have approved various types of public art, whether it's a wagon wheel or even the skate park itself has public art built into it, I would argue. But I think the point is well taken in terms of planning for it, or even the mural on the street here, on the corner, which now I understand needs some rehabilitation. So the point is well taken in terms of, yeah, it's not only the cost of the installation, but the cost of maintaining it. Like the cenotaph at Old Pelham Town Hall, that the reaction is, well, let's just do something that we don't have to maintain. No, we recognize the importance of it in a heritage feature, and also we should set aside money to make sure that that is maintained. So as a foundation, as a goal, as a master document, I think this is great as well. And it does call us to follow through, as some members of council have said, with whether it's a committee or funding, etc., to make sure that we do not only put in public art and add to our town, but also maintain it. So I look forward to those discussions as well, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. All done on this motion?
Quickly,
Oh,
just to
sorry,
build on
Pat.
Councilor Durley's point, not to sound simplistic, but how this message is conveyed to the public is going to be important. And I don't know, you know what I'm trying to say. They'll say, well, what are you talking about now? We're talking about setting a public art vision, a raison d'etre for us that would include these components, so that people understand how this is going to unfold. And I think Councilor Durley agreed that people have short-term memories, and now that's the time for them to. This is a major step for us. So your rolling out of this is going to be, our rolling out of this is going to be very important. Thank you.
Anyone out on that? Anyone else on this? Okay, so the motion is, be it resolved, the council received the concept report, Public Art Master Plan, and the council hereby approve the Public Art Master Plan dated October 2016. Everyone in favor of the motion? Motion carries. Okay, and then, yes, Councilor Kersey brings forth the motion that this regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for November 7th or after the World Series. I mean, no, sorry. Thank you.
I'll second that if I was able to.
4?
Okay, so we have 15 minutes to do,
Get it up on the smart board.
Guys, it's only bottom of 5.
Oh, 5 to 5.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Not even halfway. People at the bottom of the
Obviously, the bats are still asleep.
It has been fantastic.